This is Tales of the Twisted, true stories of the strange, weird, bizarre, and eerie. Today's story takes place in the one place we're taught to believe is the safest, the neonatal ward. A place where premature infants fight for their first breaths, where exhausted parents cling to hope, and where nurses are trusted with the smallest, most fragile human lives. But in 2015, inside the Countess of Chester Hospital in northwest England, something went terribly wrong. Babies began coding, babies began dying, and suspicion began to fall on someone who should have been their protector. What followed would become one of the most shocking, controversial, and divisive criminal cases in British history. This is the dark, unraveling story of Lucy Letby. Now, before we get into the story, let me say there's a lot of facts to this case. Facts that could be considered a little monotonous, overwhelming. But all of these facts are important because at the end of the story, you'll see what you think you know may not be true. Lucy Letby was born on January 4th, 1990 in Hereford, UK, the only child of a furniture salesman and an accounts clerk. By all accounts, she grew up shy, studious, and determined. A childhood friend later said she wanted to become a neonatal nurse because she herself had survived a difficult birth. She believed she owed her life to the nurses who cared for her. Letby followed that dream all the way to the University of Chester, where she trained in child nursing. Her placements took her to Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital. And though she initially struggled, failing her final student placement until requesting a new assessor, she graduated in 2011 with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. By January of 2012, she was fully qualified, a neonatal nurse, a job she had wanted since childhood. She rented apartments, made friends, worked long shifts, and appeared to be the kind of nurse everyone wanted on their unit. Eager, involved, even participating in fundraising campaigns for a new neonatal ward. But cracks quietly appeared long before anyone noticed. In 2013, Letby and a senior nurse set a morphine infusion rate at 10 times the correct dosage for a newborn. She was suspended from handling controlled drugs for a week. In 2016, she administered antibiotics to an infant who had not been prescribed them. She dismissed it as a minor error. By then, she had completed specialization courses, including neonatal intensive care. She qualified to work with the sickest infants, those born far too early, far too small, and fighting for every heartbeat. To colleagues, Letby sometimes said she found caring for healthier babies boring. She preferred the high stakes, the adrenaline, the babies who needed the most. No one yet knew how important that detail would become. The year was 2015. 3 years into her career at the Countess of Chester Hospital, Letby was working on the neonatal unit full-time. Around her, the unit was struggling, short-staffed, overstretched, and caring for increasingly premature infants with limited resources. Then in June 2015, something happened that shook the ward. Within days, 4 infants coded. 3 of them died. The unit typically saw 2 or 3 deaths a year. Now, 3 had occurred in rapid succession. An informal review was launched. They noted something unusual. Lucy Letby had been on shift for all the incidents. But at the time, this was not considered suspicious. There were only 2 qualified junior nurses on duty during those weeks. Letby often volunteered for extra shifts to cover staff shortages. A cluster? Yes, but perhaps a coincidence. The deaths were officially classified as medication errors. The unit was told to improve staffing and oversight. Life on the ward resumed. Letby kept working. The coding kept coming. As 2015 bled into 2016, a sense of unease spread among consultants. Infants who should have been stable suddenly deteriorated. Recovering babies coded without warning. Some bled unexpectedly. Some displayed unusual skin discoloration, blotches, patches, lividity patterns that doctors couldn't explain. And nearly every time, Lucy Letby was there. A consultant later recalled entering a room in February 2016 to find a baby coding. Letby stood beside the child but did not intervene. When questioned, she said the decline had just begun. The infant survived, but he wasn't the only one. Between March and June 2016, 3 more babies nearly died. Then came the case of triplets. Healthy boys, born in good condition. Within 2 days, 2 of them were dead. Consultants were horrified. They asked management to remove Lucy Letby from the ward. They were told to not make a fuss. The deaths were mounting. The pattern was forming. But the hospital's executive team insisted the spike was coincidental. At one point, the Care Quality Commission visited the hospital. Staff told inspectors they felt supported and able to raise concerns, but no one mentioned the spike in mortality. Behind closed doors, doctors were pleading for action. Management resisted. The tension between clinicians and administrators would soon become central to the entire case. By June 2016, the situation had become unbearable for clinicians on the neonatal unit. More codes, more unexplained deaths, more infants deteriorating under circumstances no one can fully explain. After returning from a holiday in Ibiza, Lucy Letby resumed her shifts, and almost immediately, 2 more infants died. On June 24, 2016, lead neonatologist Stephen Brary phoned the duty executive in desperation. He begged again that Letby be removed from clinical duties. The executive disagreed. Lucy Letby would stay. But the pressure was mounting. Public trust in the hospital was fragile. Mortality rates had doubled, and doctors were refusing to stay silent. At the end of June, hospital executives discussed whether to involve the police. But instead of contacting law enforcement, they arranged for a review through the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health. Finally, on June 30th, Letby was quietly taken off the ward. Her last shift on the neonatal unit had ended. On July 7th, managers scaled back the unit's operations. Fewer cots, stricter admittance rules, no more infants needing intensive care. And after that, the unexpected deaths stopped. In the months that followed, the hospital's internal conflict escalated. The Royal College's review began in September 2016. The assessment concluded no clear cause for the deaths, but noted severe staffing issues and inadequate senior coverage. They even praised Letby's skills and called the concerns against her subjective. Then, something even more shocking happened. In December of 2016, the hospital's chief executive apologized to Lucy Letby and her parents. He said the consultants who raised concerns would be dealt with. The doctors were instructed to write Letby a letter of apology, which they reluctantly did. Internally, the situation bordered on surreal. Clinicians were warning that babies were dying under Letby's care. Management insisted she was a victim of unfair suspicion, and the unit's death rate was still dramatically higher than expected. In January 2017, Letby's grievance was formally upheld. Her removal from the ward was deemed orchestrated by consultants with no hard evidence. The hospital framed the doctor's concerns as a professional attack, but the consultants refused to back down. In March 2017, 4 of them again approached management, this time demanding police involvement. They were ignored. So on April 27, 2017, they contacted the police directly. At last, the police agreed. The situation required investigation. 5 days later, Letby was due to return to clinical duties, but with police involvement imminent, the unit could no longer risk it. She never returned to the neonatal ward again. The police investigation was named Operation Hummingbird. Initially, it was broad. 61 cases of infant death or sudden codes were reviewed. Retired pediatrician and expert witness Dewey Evans contacted the National Crime Agency, offering his assistance. He would become the lead medical expert throughout the case. Across 2017 and 2018, police assembled a panel of specialists, forensic pathologists, pediatric radiologists, hematologists, endocrinologists, pediatric surgeons. These experts combed through medical notes, blood gas readings, imaging, and autopsy reports. Gradually, the focus narrowed. 22 cases were deemed suspicious enough to form the basis of charges. Then on July 3rd, 2018, police arrested Lucy Letby on suspicion of 8 counts of murder, 6 counts of attempted murder. During searches of her home and her parents' home, investigators found nursing handover sheets, resuscitation records, blood gas readings, and handwritten notes filled with disturbing, fragmented sentences. Among the phrases, "I am evil, I did this. I killed them on purpose. Help me. I haven't done anything wrong. Maybe I did. Maybe this is all down to me." The prosecution would later call these notes the closest thing to a confession. The defense would argue they were the writings of a distressed woman under investigation. Letby was bailed, then rearrested in 2019 and again in November 2020, this time denied bail. The community in Chester was stunned. Friends, colleagues, and former schoolmates described her as quiet, sweet, gentle, a typical British nurse with nothing sinister in her background. The contrast between the allegations and her public image only deepened the mystery. By November 2020, the Crown Prosecution Service formally charged her with 7 murders, 15 attempted murders, involving 17 infants known only as Baby A through Baby Q. Her trial was set, and the world would soon hear details no neonatal unit ever wants to face again. Lucy Letby's trial opened at Manchester Crown Court on October 10, 2022. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. The courtroom was filled with her parents, the families of the infants, reporters, and colleagues, many of whom testified under anonymity orders rarely granted in UK courts. The prosecution alleged an array of deliberate methods: air injected into the bloodstream, air injected via nasogastric tubes, insulin poisoning, excessive milk infusion, physical harm to internal organs, dislodging breathing tubes, and falsifying medical records. They said Letby was the only common denominator across the codes. They said the deaths stopped when she left the ward. They said she had searched for grieving families online. They said she inserted herself into tragedies, then messaged colleagues with running commentary. They painted her as someone who played God, seeking attention, thrill, or emotional stimulation from crisis and death. Letby's defense argued the opposite. She was a dedicated nurse, working in a dangerously understaffed unit where hygiene problems, sewage backflow, and infection risks were ignored, where medical errors happened frequently, where infants were extremely premature and fragile, and where managers shut down clinicians who raised valid concerns. They told jurors there was no direct proof, only inference, assumptions, misinterpretations, and flawed medical theories. Throughout the trial, Letby testified in her own defense. She cried when discussing accusations and how her life had collapsed. But observers noted she rarely cried when discussing the infants. At times, she contradicted herself. At other moments, she appeared calm, emotionless, or evasive. The courtroom watched every twitch, every shift of her voice, every tear or lack of one. But emotion was not what this case was hinged on. It hinged on evidence, and the interpretation of that evidence would divide experts for years to come. When the prosecution began laying out the evidence, they presented a narrative that was both clinical and chilling. They spoke about baby E, whose mother heard him scream, a sound no premature infant should be able to produce. She found blood around his mouth. Lucy Letby was in the room. Letby told her, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." Baby E died hours later. And then after his death, Letby sent the parents a sympathy card, a handwritten message she photographed and saved on her phone. Soon after baby E's death, his twin, baby F, became gravely ill. He survived, but his blood test results showed abnormal insulin levels. The prosecution said it was deliberate poisoning. Two infants, baby F and baby L, had almost identical results. Their expert witness called it the smoking gun, the clearest proof that someone had administered synthetic insulin. Letby denied it. Investigators discovered that Letby repeatedly searched the Facebook profiles of grieving parents, including on Christmas Day, on death anniversaries, and sometimes in clusters, as if she were hunting for grief. She searched for 11 families, often minutes apart. Letby said she was just curious. Her phone contained messages describing codes almost as if she were live blogging them. "Work has been shit, but I just won 135 pounds on the Grand National. I think there's an element of fate involved. I need to take an ITU baby soon for confidence." Within hours or days of some messages, a baby coded. The prosecution called it sinister timing. The defense said it was coincidence. Perhaps the most influential piece of evidence presented to the jury was a chart. It showed that Letby was present for 25 incidents, every collapse and every death included in the charges. The prosecution said it proved she was the common factor, a simple process of elimination. But later, statisticians argued that the chart was flawed, unclear inclusion criteria, missing context about total shifts, missing data from other staff, and later revealed mislabeled door swipe logs. At trial, however, the chart was powerful. During searches of Letby's home and handbag, investigators found handwritten notes, frantic, emotional, fragmented. Some were pleas, "Help me, why me? I'm sorry that you couldn't have a chance at life." Some were defensive, "I haven't done anything wrong. We tried our best." Others were darker. "I am evil. I did this. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. I don't know if I killed them. Maybe I did." The prosecution called them confessions, the closest thing, they said, to an admission of guilt. The defense called them the writings of a young woman under immense emotional pressure, told that she was responsible for deaths, removed from the unit, suspended and isolated. Psychological experts after the trial argued that the notes resembled therapeutic journaling, written on the advice of a doctor. But in the courtroom, those notes landed with crushing weight. Throughout the trial, the infants were known only as baby A to baby Q, their identities sealed, their families shielded, their stories agonizing. The court heard about baby A, who died from what the prosecution called an air embolus. Baby C, a sudden code attributed to air via nasogastric tube. Baby D, another alleged air embolus. Baby E, bleeding and coding. Baby F, insulin poisoning. Baby G, twice alleged overfeeding. Baby I, air embolus or air via nasogastric tube. Baby L, insulin poisoning. Baby M, suspected air injection. Baby N, throat trauma. Baby O, liver injury and air embolus. Baby P, air injection via nasogastric tube. Doctors testified that many of the infants were initially recovering or stable when sudden, unexplained declines occurred. During the triplet deaths in 2016, consultants described the atmosphere as traumatic, chaotic, and terrifying. They were convinced something unnatural was happening. The defense maintained prematurity alone could explain many codes. The unit was understaffed. Medical errors and infection outbreaks were possible. and infants in that ward often died naturally, sometimes without clear cause. One consultant said infant codes were nearly always explainable, yet in this case, he believed they weren't. In the case of child K, Letby was accused of dislodging a breathing tube. No one saw her do it. The deterioration could not be directly attributed. Accidental dislodgement is extremely common. The defense argued the evidence was far too weak. Years later, an uncovered email suggested Letby had actually called a consultant to the bedside during the crisis, contradicting his testimony. In the case of child O, prosecutors argued the infant sustained blunt trauma to the liver, deliberate harm. But the original pathologist said it could have been natural. A leading perinatal pathologist later agreed. A joint review by neonatologists working with Letby's legal team argued the injury may have occurred accidentally during a medical procedure. The prosecution's expert said otherwise. The jury had to weigh competing interpretations of complex medical evidence, a theme that would define the case long after the verdict. On August 18, 2023, after months of testimony, the jury delivered their decision. Lucy Letby was found guilty of 7 murders, guilty of 7 attempted murders, not guilty on 2 charges, and no verdict returned on 6 attempted murder charges. The judge called her actions a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder. In August of 2023, he sentenced her to a whole life order. She became only the 4th woman in UK history to receive that sentence. Letby refused to attend the courtroom. She was transferred to prison. Public outrage was overwhelming. Media headlines labeled her Britain's most prolific modern child killer. But this was not the end. Not for investigators, not for clinicians, and not for the scientific community. After her conviction, she was placed on an interim suspension by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and by December 2023, she was struck off the nurses' register entirely. Her life, as she knew it, was over. But outside the prison walls, the story was far from finished. There were still questions, millions of them. Questions about the hospital, questions about the evidence, questions about the medicine, questions about the statistics, questions about whether every detail presented at trial held up under scrutiny. The more time that passed, the louder those questions became. In 2024, Lucy Letby applied to the Court of Appeal for permission to challenge her conviction. A judge rejected her request. She tried again, this time with 4 legal arguments: that certain expert evidence should not have been allowed, that the medical evidence for air embolism was very weak, that the jury was wrongly instructed they could convict without knowing the exact method, that a juror's impartiality had not been properly examined. In May of 2024, 3 senior judges heard the case. They refused all 4 grounds. Their conclusion: the trial had been thoughtful, fair, comprehensive, and correct. For many, that was enough to settle the matter. But for others, it wasn't even close. One of the attempted murder charges, one the jury couldn't decide on in 2023, was sent back for retrial. In June of 2024, a new trial began. And on July 2nd, a verdict: guilty. And on July 5th, Letby received a second whole life order. 2 months later, she attempted to appeal that conviction as well. Her request was denied. As public anger grew, the UK government launched a statutory inquiry. This was tasked with examining how warnings about Letby were handled and how so many infants could die without decisive intervention. The inquiry began on September 10, 2024, with testimony revealing a unit plagued with staffing shortages, skill mix issues, miscommunication, consultants who felt silenced, managers who downplayed concerns, and a culture that discouraged escalation. Doctors testified that Letby was excited and gossipy about deaths, and that she considered caring for low acuity infants boring. But the inquiry wasn't just about Letby. In 2025, police arrested 3 former senior hospital leaders on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. A separate investigation opened into corporate manslaughter at the Countess of Chester Hospital, and detectives continued investigating at least 30 more infants from both Chester and Liverpool Women's Hospital, cases previously classified as unexpected and unexplained deteriorations. The possibility of new charges loomed. The shadow of this story was only getting bigger. After the trials concluded and reporting restrictions were lifted, something unexpected happened. Experts began speaking out. The neonatologists, pathologists, toxologists, chemists, surgeons, microbiologists, and researchers from all around the world. They challenged the safety of the convictions. Their concerns fell into several broad categories. The insulin tests were prone to error. Air via nasogastric tubes were implausible, ridiculous, impossible. Some findings did not suggest air embolisms. Diagnosing it by ruling out other causes is a fundamental mistake of medicine. And in 2024, there was an expert panel. They were given access to medical records, witness testimony, and clinical documentation. Their findings stunned the medical world. They found no medical evidence of deliberate harm. Every death or code could be explained by natural causes or substandard care. They found no murders. Letby's legal team filed an application with the Criminal Cases Review Commission for overturning the convictions. But today, Lucy Letby still sits in prison, serving a whole life order. The hospital faces criminal and statutory investigations. Senior executives have been arrested. The inquiry continues to this day, and the medical community remains fiercely divided. Questions remain. What truly happened on the neonatal unit between 2015 and 2016? Was Lucy Letby a calculating serial killer who hid in plain sight, or a young nurse caught in the perfect storm of a collapsing hospital system, flawed evidence, and medical uncertainty? The truth now lies in a tangled web of medicine, stats, human error, institutional failure, and emotion. A web so dense that even experts disagree. Whether Lucy Letby is a monster or a victim, history has not yet decided. And until the investigations conclude, until every expert opinion is weighed, and until every evidentiary challenge is addressed, the case of Lucy Letby will remain one of the darkest, most disturbing, and most mysterious medical stories of the modern age. This has been Tales of the Twisted, true stories of the strange, weird, bizarre, and eerie. If you found this episode compelling, follow the show, leave a rating, and share it with someone who seeks the truth hidden in the shadows. Until then, stay aware, stay curious, and remember, the truth is often far more terrifying than fiction.